You know, I don't think we've covered thoroughly enough the prospects for better relations between Japan and China and the possibility of that being trilateral cooperation. And historically, of course, stemming from the Second World War and before, there are a lot of bad feelings, a lot of bad blood between China and Japan, and a lot of distrust. And yet I think that there are serious people in both capitals, I mean Beijing and Tokyo, who are finding a way to get past those frictions and to build relations. When I brought up with some people this issue of the 1,000-ship Navy, the Global Maritime Partnership, and said, you are concerned that Taiwan might be included and that would be something that you wouldn't be able to tolerate, probably, unless we could work around it somehow. But how about the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force? And I found far less concern. So it reminds me that there is very much an opportunity for the U.S. and Japan and China, and I don't want to forget South Korea, to improve their relations and at least have, as I brought it up initially, a trilateral relationship. That might include the maritime relationship, but of course it includes other things as well. So there is room for improvement in that relationship. And it has its bearing on Taiwan. Of course, the concerns about in China about Japan's role if there is a conflict with Taiwan and so forth. So we can use an additional bit of assurance that will make that whole thing a little smoother and sort of grease the skids there.
Okay. Do you think is Japan willing to take on a greater role globally, as Gates had requested, or?
You know, it was interesting, of course, that I guess it was in Tokyo that Secretary Gates made the comment about the shouldering more global responsibility, or some words like that. My jet-lagged brain may not be producing the words exactly, but I seem to remember that Prime Minister Fukuda, the new Prime Minister of Japan, of course, was at the same time, or roughly simultaneously, suggesting that maybe Japan's foreign policy focus should be more Asian. So he was narrowing things down while Secretary Gates seemed to be expanding. I'm working only with press reports, so I assume that was accurate, but it did seem to be an interesting contradiction. Now, of course, the Chinese would look at that and say, if the Japanese are going to narrow their focus, well, let's let them do it. They would be quite happy with that because of their concerns. But that gets back to the point of my thought that we need to find a way to have our very good relationship with Japan. And of course, it's an extremely important one. And balance that with our relationship with China. And that fits together with the trilateral relations that I mentioned a minute ago. And I don't mean to denigrate the importance of the relationship with Japan. It may be the best relationship we have bilaterally with any country in the region, or however one might wish to define it. But I say at the same time, the most important bilateral relationship maybe in the world today and for the future of the world is that between the U.S. and China. So I'm an advocate, for whatever my words might mean, of fostering the good relations we have with Japan and taking good care of the very important relations that we have with China. And it seems to me that's something that's not being done, at least to my satisfaction, whatever that means. It seems that we could pay a little more attention to doing that.
Okay, so we should support relations between the U.S. and China and bilateral relations with Japan. What about relations between Japan and China? Is that something the U.S. should take a leading role in?
I hesitate to say that we should take a leading role.
Okay.
Because I think that they are doing it now, and our solutions just might not be the ones that work out best for the two of them. I think many of us who follow these things would say that we hope, for example, between China and Taiwan, that the U.S. doesn't have to be the one coming up with the solutions, because, of course, then the first thing that goes wrong is Washington gets blamed for it and saying, of course, this is not working, this was a Washington idea. And so the same thing with China and Japan. Already there is momentum moving, so we need to be in a supportive role. And one of the important things there is balancing how closely how close we get in our relationship with Japan, and just taking into account that things like supporting further modernization of the Japanese self-defense forces, a broader role for them, that those things concern China. So we should at least take that into account. I am not suggesting that we stop doing these things, but rather that we are consulting and taking into account the views of others and so forth. So in that role, understanding that we do have a role and that we can cause concern in that relationship.
Okay. Sort of the big picture in East Asia over the next 10, 15, 20 years, will the U.S. continue to play a big role in East Asia, or will our role diminish as?
My crystal ball is dim, but I think so. So I think the odds are that we still are a major player, that we are a power to be reckoned with in that region. Remember that there are those in China today who recognize the value of an American role in East Asia. And some say they're anxious to get us out, but of course almost everyone makes a joke, but not too quickly, feeling that we do play a stabilizing role, and that maybe China's 30 years of economic progress and so forth has been assisted greatly by the U.S. presence and stability and so forth. So although countries might not be happy with every little thing we've done, that we're seen as a positive factor there. And can't help but mention that our relationship with the South Koreans is a bit troublesome right now. But I don't want to make a gloomy forecast about that either. So yes, I see the U.S. as having a slightly different role, but still the likelihood that we are there as a significant naval power, a significant military power, and as a good friend to all of those countries.
Okay. Well, we are coming to the end of our time here. Any last words you'd like to include in our discussion of security issues?
Like the words that I found myself saying just a moment ago, that we are still there both as a military power and a good friend to all the countries. And of course, I have to say that when looking as far ahead as you asked me to a moment ago, that one of the things is how the Taiwan problem gets resolved. And I guess that my hope is that within my lifetime, that economic factors and China's soft power and whatever, that between across the straits, that we find a resolution that will both have a happy outcome for Taiwan and a satisfactory outcome for China. That's a tough nut to crack, but that's one of the things that keeps me working on these issues, to have some tiny little role in making that come out well.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today, Admiral McVadon, excuse me.
Yeah.
And I will wrap it up here and say thank you, and thank you to our audience. Thanks for watching, and please tune in next Sunday.